Did you want to come jet skiing and I didn't let you? Hi. 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 You want some taco? What's up, jet ski fans? Welcome to another Joel Arsenault YouTube video. As most of you have probably seen, a few videos back I had a catastrophic engine failure on my X2, and as a result of that I had a damaged head, a head that I did a whole bunch of work on. So I put an OEM head onto the X2, and partly because of our altitude here, but also partly due to the fact that the OEM head has a lot of squish and just a lot of volume. My engine now has about 95, 98 PSI. And yeah, that is unacceptable. So I grabbed another head and I was like, well, I could machine down this head while I'm doing testing on the X2. I'll leave that other one on. This is a second OEM cylinder head. This one came off of the C-Rat. So I was like, I could machine that down a bit. But then I got thinking about how much work I put into my old cylinder head, and I was like, well, it'd be nice if I could fix that up. And then I got thinking about it, and I was like, with all the work that I'll put into this, wouldn't it just be smarter to buy an ADA head? And then I looked at the price. So what I've decided to try instead is actually turning my old cylinder head into a cap and building my own domes. So I still need to remove a little bit more material, but I removed enough to see that in fact this will work. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be a pretty cool project even if it doesn't work. This is a piece of 4-inch by 1 foot long aluminum 6061 T6, and this is 5-inch. It is now the next day and my bandsaw finally finished cutting through this 4-inch slug of aluminum, and I'm glad I didn't try to time lapse it because this literally took hours, like multiple hours to cut through. This is probably going to end up being a scrap piece, my first one. I am fairly certain that this is by far the biggest chunk of metal I've ever worked with in my lathe. Verifying that these spark plugs are in fact 14 by 1.25, which they are. So now I need to figure out what drill size you use for threading 14 by 1.25. I'm actually going to drill a smaller hole first, and then I will use a 3/8 end mill, and that way I'll get a more accurate hole. So I'm going to use whatever drill bit this is. Let's hope there's not a whole lot of chatter here. That ended up working quite well, with the exception that the battery got stuck in my GoPro. It swelled up, and when I tried to pull it out, I pulled the end off of the battery, and so I had to wait for the battery to cool off a little bit so the swelling would go down, and then change my battery. So in the meantime, I cut the outside surface of this, and I also set up my tool so that it is exactly on center with the center of the workpiece and so that it is at the right height. Alright folks, I've been doing a little bit of cutting and I've got the cutter set up so that it's actually cutting the perfect shape, and now I need to get it to cut to the correct depth. So I need to go to 20 millimeters, 19.9, so 20 millimeters. And I'm currently only at, let's see here. I'm currently at around 11. After a whole lot of messing around, I have the combustion chamber cut on my first head, and I'm getting ready to set up and cut the squish angle, which is going to be 3 degrees. So let's get to that. In order to get my compound set up at the right angle, I've actually removed the tool post and I'm going to work off the surface of the head itself. I won't be able to show you guys this, I don't think, but the actual dial reads in like 2.5 degree increments. So yeah, it just doesn't make sense. It's not fine enough of an adjustment. So what I'm doing, I'm going to work off the actual surface, as I've said. Work off the actual surface of the part, which I've trued. I think I might actually cut 4, but it's going to be hard to explain, but I'll say this and hopefully some of you understand it. If I try to cut it at 3 degrees and it cuts less than 3 degrees, it's going to make a pocket on the outer perimeter, or the outer, what's that called? Circumference of the piston, which I definitely don't want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to 4, and if it cuts a little bit under, then it still should be over 3. That probably wasn't worded very well. I need to make sure not to cut this angle beyond 80, what is it, 82 millimeters. That is my bore size. So I want the taper to end at the end of the bore and not beyond. All right, 6.45, let's get a line scribed in here. Now I'm going to make sure that I have the lathe set up appropriately and everything locked in place. That is the shape that our squish band is going to be. I am going to round the transition between the squish band and the combustion chamber, but I haven't figured out exactly how I'm going to do that yet. I might do it by hand, or I might build a tool. I do not know. I've gotten to the point where I need to do some modifications to the head. I've already started to cut it out, but I need to complete cutting out the head so that I know exactly what shape and what size to make the dome. And although that might seem like a pretty easy part of the process, I ran into the problem of not having a tool that could cut a 90-degree shoulder at the bottom of the hole. And that is important because if I don't have a 90-degree shoulder, I can't torque down the head and have it push on the dome. So part of the problem, this is a boring bar out of my boring head. And I don't know how well the camera picks up on this, but the bottom of this is actually at an angle. I don't know how many degrees. It's probably like 5 or 6 degrees slanted down this way. And so if I use this in my boring head to cut the hole out, it would actually have the shoulder at the bottom would be angled towards the center, like a volcano basically, at about 6 degrees. So I was struggling trying to come up with something. I was thinking, you know, there's got to be a way that I can do this, and I probably have something that I can do it with. And then I realized I can use a 3/4 inch end mill. End mills are completely flat across the bottom. So there you have it. I haven't actually tried doing any cutting with it, but I've got it set up to a little under 90 millimeters. I'm going to bore it out. Hopefully, the plan is anyway, to bore it out to 92 millimeters. Unfortunately, I'm not able to use the dial. The dial pulls the tool out this way, and I wouldn't be able to get a big enough bore if I did it that way. So I'm going to have to manually just tap and check the adjustment of the head. And yeah, it's going to be a little sketchy, but hopefully it works. There we go. There's 1 millimeter. I'll tighten up the head. And we're going to try cutting till we hit the stop. Kind of second guessing my depth now. I think maybe it's a little too deep. This could be my last cut, or it could be a ruined part, I suppose. That's possible as well. I just dialed in 1/2 millimeter, which should bring me to my final size, 92 millimeters. So let's hope this works. I'm going to double check. Make sure this is staying tight. And let's go. Now, after all that, let's see if our bore is anywhere near 92 millimeters. I am custom making the domes so I can make them to whatever size I want, but the goal is to make this 92 millimeters. So let's see how close we came to achieving that. Ho ho ho! 9201. It's going to be 92. Yeah, 9201. Wow. I am definitely going to leave that alone. What I need to do now is turn down the outside diameter to 92 millimeters. I wanted a couple thou under 92 millimeters so that it will actually fit in the cylinder head. All right, there we have it. That part of it is cut. This should fit on now. Okay, nice snug fit. That's what we want to see. I've got a little bit more work done, as you guys can see. I got the dome parted off from the original slug. This will be turned into the next dome. But for now, I've been focusing on this. I cut down the area that will go through the top of the cylinder head cap. So this piece here is going to go through here where the spark plug goes in, just like that. So that's handy that it fits in there nice and snug because that's where it's gonna go. I did make one error somehow. I cut this 12 millimeter, which I meant to do, but I somehow cut the groove in the cap, or the OEM cylinder head. I cut this 14 millimeters deep. I'm kind of second guessing my depth now. I think maybe it's a little too deep. I've been struggling trying to figure out this angle now for probably over an hour. I've basically got it cut by doing test cuts on it. And I tried to use a rise over run calculator to figure it out. Told me it was 61 or 62 degrees, can't remember now. Looked like it was pretty close, so I started cutting and it turns out it was way off. According to my math, this doesn't make sense at all. Either the gauge is way off on my compound, which is possible, or it's too late to do this. This will all have to be redone anyway because it's not the right depth. I'll set that once I thread it, I guess. But I need to get some pictures for Patreon. Show everybody my progress. And then I'm going in the house because I am exhausted. I think it's after midnight. All right, folks, there you have it. I thought I would film a little of cutting an O-ring groove. This is my first attempts at doing so. I've already cut the first two and I decided to film the third one now that I kind of have it figured out a little bit. So I want the O-ring groove to be 1 millimeter in from each side so that it will be 90 millimeter OD on the O-ring. And then because I'm using a 2 millimeter O-ring, the groove needs to be about 2.6 millimeters. So I've got a 2 millimeter cutter. What I will do is cut the groove and then I will shift it in for the 0.6 extra width. So now I am 40 thousandths in. This is where I will do my first cut, and then I will shift it in another 20 thousandths to get the 0.6 of a millimeter. Yeah, anyway, let's just get started. I've got the belt changed so that my RPM is 150 RPM. Turning quite slow and very gently touch off. The accuracy of the O-ring groove doesn't have to be perfect because, well, O-rings have some give to them. The whole idea is that the O-ring will stick out enough to make a seal, so the depth of this is going to be 1.4 deep. I've got one of them at 1.39 and the other one is at 1.43 or 1.44 or something like that. .43. So I overshot again a little bit. So I went into two shops yesterday. The first one only dealt with, they didn't deal with any metric stuff, oddly enough. So I went to a second shop and I told the guy what I thought I was looking for, which was a 90 millimeter outside diameter and a cross section of 1.5 millimeters. And he looks at me and says, "Oh, we won't have that. That's a very odd size. You're gonna have a hard time finding it." And so I said, okay, well, what if I go with 2 millimeters? And he says, perfect, we'll have no problem getting that. And I wanted to make sure that I got something that had relatively good availability so that if I needed some, I wouldn't have to wait a month to get them or some weird thing like that, or make my own. So I ordered 6 of them. It cost me $30.64 for 6. And they didn't have them there, but they had them in a warehouse. So they showed up at 10 a.m. this morning. So I go to pick them up. I get in the truck after getting them and I look at the package and it says 91 by 2. So I don't know why the guy put 91 millimeters instead of 90 millimeters. But yeah. Anyway, I'm rambling now, so let's just see if this O-ring will fit. There is a little bit of leeway on the outside. And it looks like I will be able to get this to fit. Okay, good news. I don't have 6 O-rings that I will be throwing in the garbage. All right, so that is fantastic news. That means that we can now pull the head off of the X2 and install these. For you guys, that was probably half an hour, but for me, it was a heck of a process. To start with, first I had to put the engine together wrong, you know, for video's sake, and then pretend that I damaged my head, and then mill it out, and then make the domes and put them in. And then it turns out I got some bum Chinese stainless steel nuts that were slightly oversized. They wrecked all of my studs. That caused me to strip out one of the holes in my block, which then led to me removing the engine, putting helicoils in all of the holes because I'm a weirdo, and decking 15 thou off of the top of the cylinders to reduce my squish band and bump up my compression a little bit. So we're at a 145 PSI currently, and I'm going to try to fire it up for the first time here. So sit back and enjoy. All right, gentlemen, wrong answers only. What happens when you mix 87 and 94 octane?